Hey, what's up you guys? You're watching Team APS, and in today's video, I'm gonna give you guys 5 rogue but competitive deck ideas for the June 12th, 2017 format. This is part of my summer of Yu-Gi-Oh! Where I'm uploading a new video every single day, so if you haven't already, check out yesterday's video and subscribe so you don't miss tomorrow's video. And one more thing, I'm gonna be giving away a box of Pendulum Evolution if we can reach 70,000 subscribers. And if we reach 75,000 subscribers, I'm gonna be giving away a box of Battles of Legend Light's Revenge. So don't just subscribe to the channel, share it with your friends, tell them to subscribe too. All right, let's hop in. Deck number 1 is Pendulum Magician / Performa Pals. I kind of wanted to include this as 2 separate decks, but I was like, you know what, they're related and it kind of just makes sense to cram them both together. So as we know, Pendulum Call, Skull Crobat Joker, and Wisdom Eye Magician all recently went to 3. So Performa Pals and Magicians, they've gotten a really big buff. And while I don't think that they're gonna be like at the bleeding edge of the meta, I do think that they're going to be a very viable deck. And also a pretty cheap deck, although not all the decks on this list are budget necessarily, it is a really good one. So the benefit to Pendulums, of course, is that they're hyper consistent right now with, you know, triple Joker, triple Pendulum Call, and then cards like Duelist Alliance. This deck can pretty much get to its resources really quickly. You still have access to all the really good old Pendulum monsters, Guiding Ariadne, Archfiend Eccentric, Draco Face Off, and you know, Luster Pendulum and Ignister Prominence, all those guys. In addition, the Pendulum Evolution set is going to be coming out in like another week or so, and it also is pretty decent, although really this deck doesn't need most of the new cards in it. I mean, Pendulum Graph of the Ages is decent, but really all the cards that exist now are totally good. And what's neat about this deck too is that it has access to the rank 4 toolbox, the rank 3 toolbox really, all of the Draco Slayer like fusions and stuff, the Odd Eyes fusion monsters. So there's a lot you can do here. I like this because it is really, it's kind of something that not a lot of people expect. No one's really going to be siding like Anti-Spell Fragrance, for example, anymore. But you do still have to worry about things like Cosmic Cyclone, things like Unending Nightmare, and you know, that type of stuff. Ash Blossom can hurt a lot of this deck's search power. But if you want something that like people aren't particularly focused on, I think this would be a really strong pick. The second deck is Windwitch Invoke Artifacts. So I'm actually not a huge fan of this deck because it's really annoying to face, but there's no denying that it is really powerful, and it's a deck that honestly and truly, it hasn't gotten any worse when you think about it. You know, none of the cards have really been limited or banned. It just kind of fell out of fashion. Zoodiacs and True Draco are maybe more powerful decks, but this deck can still do a lot, at least, you know, until Link monsters come along. You have strong boss monsters like Crystal Wing. You can make the invincible Crystal Wing with your Wind Witches. And then you have access to Invoke Raijin, which means that Instant Fusion is still usable for this deck. And then of course Invoke Mechaba, which is the negator that also banishes. And the artifact engine in this deck can be really powerful for dealing with your opponent's stuff because with Artifact Scythe, you're basically able to lock your opponent out of the extra deck for a turn, and that, you know, includes Pendulum, Synchro, Xyz summoning. So in addition to running maybe copies of Dimensional Barrier in here, you're also able to just, you know, have sort of 3 more Dimensional Barriers with your Scythes, your Sanctum, and then like also maybe a Morale tech. So this deck can really put a lot of hurt on slower decks too. And I think that it can hold its own against Zoo and True Draco. You will have to kind of side deck heavily. It does have some problems with being a little bit slow, and it has a few issues with dealing with Ash Blossom, but it's one that's worth looking at. It's not all too cheap. Some of the cards are still pricey, but again, like I said at the beginning, it's no worse than it was before, so worth a look. Deck number 3 is actually in a really similar vein, and that's Dee Dee Dees. So Dee Dee Dees came out, they got that structure deck that gave them, you know, access to things like Lamia, and it's another deck that hasn't gotten hit on the ban list. It just fell out of popularity because, you know, Zoodiacs, like a lot of decks, and Paleozoics and other things, it just got less popular. But it's not any worse than it has been. It can make some really powerful boards. You know, the Siegfried monster, right? You know, you've also got the Crystal Wing, you've got Hope Harbinger. It can make strong fields. And a lot of people will say like, oh, well, it loses to Max C, but well, Max C's at 1, so, you know, eh? And then also people will say like, well, it loses to board wipes. Right, but I think that people who say that forget that, you know, Siegfried and Hope Harbinger can negate like Interrupted Kaiju Slumber and like Raigeki. So, you know, this deck still has loads of resilience. I think the worst part about it is that it can kind of feel like a bit of a glass cannon, but it's more consistent than you would think. I mean, the Dark Contract cards, in addition to things like Allure and Pot of Desires means that you usually will see your combos sooner than you think. You know, Alec has built a Dee 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 deck, and I played against it a lot, and it tends to go off pretty much every single duel. So I think people sort of overstate how bad this deck got since Zoodiacs came out. And again, like a lot of the decks on this list, when Links come out, this deck will probably have some troubles keeping up. But until then, I do think that it is a very powerful deck option. Not actually terribly expensive outside of a couple of extra deck cards like the Crystal Wing. So if you haven't already, you know, definitely consider giving this a look, especially if you like decks that are kind of high combo potential, fast paced. It's really good. Deck number 4, Metal Foes. So this is a deck that also kind of functions as an engine. The Metal Foes cards, first of all, are very easy to get. Most of them are like commons and rares. And what's really cool about Metal Foes as an engine is that they work almost similarly to something like Dragonic Diagram, where they can destroy your cards and then get you Metal Foes cards set to your side of the field, which is huge. Their boss monsters are really good, and they're really cheap. I mean, even Alcahest being a secret rare is like really easy to get. They've got the one that, like, you know, does double piercing, things like that. And you can combine them with decks like Cosmos, for example, you know, popping things like Cosmo Town, popping the Cosmos monsters, nets you pluses. You know, engines like Balbaboon work really well in here. I've actually seen Metal Foes combine with, you know, things like True King Lithosagem. I've seen them combine with Sub-Terrors. And what's cool too is that Metal Foes Fusion is actually like a free draw every turn. So for decks that maybe need a little bit more draw power, more consistency, it can really help with that. And it's another Pendulum strategy, which, yes, means that Link format might hurt this deck a lot, but this is one of the more fun ones. I think a lot of people wrote off Metal Foes just because the whole like, oh, well, Kieran's banned, so this deck is just no longer a threat, it's no longer a problem. But it's so easy to get a hold of, I think that you're kind of doing yourself a disservice not to at least give it a try. The things this deck's of course going to struggle with is anything that can deal with its scales, and Dimensional Barrier can be a bit of an issue, but what's cool is that this deck can make fusion monsters and do pendulum summons and stuff, so it can kind of play around Dimensional Barrier, and that's something that I do really like about it. So if you want to get creative, I think this is one of the better decks on the list to do it. And the last deck on the list is Lightsworn / Zombie / 60 card grass, whatever you want to call it. This is a deck that it's a little bit tricky to include on the list because, you know, Minerva is technically a prize card, but Minerva is going to be reprinted in Battles of Legend Light's Revenge, which I'm doing a giveaway of, by the way. Make sure you get me to 75,000 subscribers so you can get that. Anyway, yeah. This deck is not that bad. Now I know that grass recently got limited, but I've played against this deck even with the 1 grass variant, and it's not all too shabby. I mean, they can still run things like Pot of Desires, you can still run things like Left Arm Offering, and the amount of advantage in plays that you get when a grass finally resolves with, you know, Fairy Tale Snow and Mizuki and Minerva's pluses and everything, Wolf and all that, it's kind of crazy. And so, you know, this deck gets access to the entire rank 4 suite, the entire, you know, level 8 synchro suite. It can really control your opponent, you know, especially when you start getting out things like Omega, start summoning, you know, Fairy Tale Snows and stuff on your opponent's turn, cutting off their plays. I think that it's just one of those things where even under Link format, it may not really be hurt nearly as much as some of the other decks on this list. And in theory, it's not all too expensive, depending on kind of which way you look at it. So this is definitely a deck that I would recommend. It's also a lot of fun to play, and it kind of reminds me of a more classic deck. It's not like one archetype really, it's a big mesh, and that means you get a little bit of creativity. And this is a deck that was, you know, topping and winning some regionals for a long time, but, you know, like everything else, when the Zoo came to take over, people started saying, oh, this deck is bad, but I think it's really not awful. So those are 5 really cool budget-ish, rogue-ish decks that can be really competitive in this new format. Now there are loads of things that I left off of this list. I mean, you know, Paleozoics come to mind, for example, or even, you know, something like Infernoids and ABCs and Burning Abyss. So there's loads of different things. Let me know down in the comments below what rogue deck options you're gonna be playing this format, because there really are plenty, and that's kind of the fun of this format. I think that a lot of decks can compete even at nationals, but we'll just have to see. So yeah, that's the video. Hope you guys liked it. Remember, this is part of the summer of Yu-Gi-Oh! I upload a video every single day. So you want to subscribe, you don't want to miss a vid, because later this week I got some really cool deck profiles planned, and we're going to be doing like a Q&A soon, all that stuff. So yeah, that's going to be it. I will catch you guys in the next one. Later.